Right. So before we commence the chapter today, let's just quickly rehash what we studied yesterday. Yesterday we started the chapter with Dhritarashtra's inquiry, right? So Dhritarashtra asks, the first verse, what did they do? Right, having assembled to fight, what did they do? Kim akruvata Sanjaya, right? And then we saw about the Duryodhana's anger and how he was taunting his master Dronacharya, right? Then we saw about the blowing of the conches. Then five reasons that Arjuna pointed out. But before that, he tells Krishna to take him to the middle of the battlefield, right? So Krishna takes him to the middle of the battlefield and asks him to behold who are the people who are against whom he is to fight, right? And then when he sees all his relatives in the opposite camp, Arjuna has several doubts, has five doubts to be precise, and he poses all those questions and says, because of these reasons, Krishna, I'm not able to fight, right? So as I mentioned earlier, this is the chapter in which Krishna answers all the questions that Arjuna poses. But just let us quickly rehash what were the five reasons that Arjuna gave for not answering, for not wanting to wage war against the Kauravas. Can you recall? There are five reasons, right? What is the first reason? You can unmute yourselves because I don't have the ability to mute anyone anyway. So,
So can I speak?
yes, correct.
So Arjun had compassion for his family members
Yeah.
when he saw them,
Yes.
and then he realized he wouldn't have any enjoyment in his kingdom when he has lost his family members like this.
Also answer. Yes, Mataji. Please carry on though. You started to answer, so carry on.
And if they kill them, he'll be covered in sin
Mm-hmm.
because of that. And if he kills all the male members of the family traditions would be destroyed.
Yes. Wonderful. You've been taking notes. Very nice. Very nice. Okay. Then
And he couldn't decide that whether to fight with his relatives or not.
he is indecisive. Right. Wonderful.
He's
Excellent, Mataji. Thank
indecisive.
you very much. Thank you. So those are the five reasons that Arjuna gave yesterday for not wanting to fight against the Kauravas. So Krishna takes each ground independently and answers them, right? So let's see how Krishna answers. So I'll give you an overview, first of all, before we start the chapter, as to how Krishna answers all these five grounds, right? So this is what Krishna is going to answer with. So for compassion, no, this is just going to be like more of a contents page, right? So unless it is explained in a little more detail, I hope by the end of this class you should be able to make sense out of this chart, right? So for compassion, which was the first ground, Krishna answers it in verses 11 to 30, right? And Krishna gives the message that we are not the body, right? So therefore it is misplaced compassion, right? And in the second reason that Arjuna points out, when he says he has no enjoyment in fighting with the Kauravas to get his kingdom, Krishna says you are either going to get the heaven or the kingdom. So therefore, you cannot say that you won't have any enjoyment. Now, insofar as the third ground is concerned, it's the fear of sinful activities. Krishna says you are in devotional activity, which is you are doing something which I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to fight, right? So Krishna says there is no sin attached when you are in devotional service, right? And then the fourth reason was indecision. Indecision, Krishna gives a very clear answer. He says, serve the Lord with firm determination, right? Resolute mind. You shouldn't be irresolute, in other words, right? After answering the last ground was the destruction of dynasty, right? That is what will happen to the family traditions. And in that, Krishna answers that you should be a role model in order to prevent Varna Shankara. Varna Shankara means the destruction of dynasty as such, right? So destruction of family tradition, all that comes under Varna Shankara. That's the term that's used to the in the text, in the Sanskrit text, right? So Krishna says you should be a role model to prevent Varna Shankara, right? Now, after answering all these five grounds, Krishna then goes on to explain about how a person who is not attached to this world should behave, right? That's called a Stitadir Muni, right? That's a phrase which is used. It's called Stitadir Muni, right? So Krishna also explains, he goes a little further than the five questions and explains about Shrita Dirpuni, right? So that is the rest of the chapter. So two parts you can divide the chapter into. The first part is where Krishna answers the five questions, and the second part is where Krishna refers to this Sthitadir Muni and what are his characteristics, how does he behave, and so on and so forth, right? So those are the broadly the answers that Krishna is going to give for the five grounds that Arjuna has raised yesterday. Right now, with that background, let us examine each of these answers that Krishna gives to Arjuna today. Okay, let's see. This is just another repetition of that. For compassion, the answer by Krishna is jnana. That is, you are not the body, right? So that is jnana as such, right? And for enjoyment, Krishna says gives the answer of karma kanda. That is, you are either going to go to heaven or you're going to get the kingdom. So therefore, there is going to be enjoyment either way. And then for sinful activities, Krishna says buddhi yoga. That's also bhakti yoga, right? So he says devotional activity does not entail any sin, right? And so on. I just explained this to you. This is just a repetition of what I just said, right? And for destruction of dynasty, Krishna gives the answer of karma yoga. That is to serve the Lord with firm determination. And then finally, we have indecision, where the answer was to serve the Lord with firm determination. Destruction of dynasty was to be a role model to prevent Varna Shankara, right? Now, Varna Shankara we'll see in the next chapter. Actually, that comes in chapter 3. That's for tomorrow, right? But this is just included here so that it forms one proper set, right? Okay, so let's examine each of this grounds and the answers to them, right? So 2.1, Sanjaya said, seeing Arjuna full of compassion, his mind depressed, his eyes full of tears, Madhusudana Krishna spoke the following words, right? Now we have got back to the palace where Sanjaya is narrating what is happening on the battlefield to Dhritarashtra, right? So Sanjaya told this verse to Dhritarashtra, uh, as an introduction to what Krishna is about to say. Like when we write letters, many of you would have gone through. Yeah, you are in school after, right? So you would have this letter writing portion in English grammar or something of that sort, right? Where you have to write a letter. So that letter is supposed to start with the date, from, to, and then the address, sir, madam, and all that. And then you have a subject, and then you have a reference, and then you have the body, right? So just like that, Sanjaya here is giving an introduction that this is like the subject. What is Krishna going to say? Why is he going to say that? Because he saw Arjuna depressed and with full of tears, right? So this is like setting the background of the scene of what Krishna is going to say, right? So we should also consider one more aspect here. Now Arjuna has put his points to Krishna, right? He has told Krishna that these are the reasons why I don't want to fight. But then Krishna does not start to advise him immediately, right? What could be the reason? Why doesn't he? Because he knew all the answers, right? So the moment the question is posed, he could have simply answered the questions directly then and there, right? But then he takes a pause, right? Krishna takes a pause. He doesn't immediately give up the answers. The reason is this. The reason is that you should give advice to someone only when they are in a calm mind, right? They should be in a receptive mode, right? So when Arjuna was speaking in the last chapter, he was not in a receptive mind. You see all the reasons that he gives, he has a very disturbed mind at that point of time, right? So Krishna takes a pause. He says, settle down. I'll tell you what is to be done. So he just gives Arjuna a short break and lets him compose himself, right? And then he starts to speak, right? So that is how one must approach a matter where the other side, you should first of all take into consideration whether the other party with whom you're having the conversation is in a position to listen to you, whether they will understand what you're trying to tell them, right? So you have to make that mm, value decision, right? And unless you come to the conclusion, yes, that person is now composed enough to understand what I'm going to tell them, only then you start to talk to them, right? To convey what you have to tell them, right? Therefore, it is the importance of, even before starting this chapter, the life lesson is that one should be a good listener first, right? Unless you're a good listener, you will not be able to convey your message to the other party who is in conversation with you, correct? Now, that is the first takeaway from this chapter here, right? So first, you should be a good listener. That's why Krishna, as I mentioned, does not immediately start giving out the answers, right? Now, there's another second important life lesson which follows in just 2-3 verses, right? So please, please pay attention, right? Okay, so this is 2.2. Sloshna Mataji, you're there? Hare Krishna. Right, anyway. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "My dear Arjuna, how have these impurities come upon you? They are
Yes,
not
sir.
at all befitting a man who knows the value of life. They lead not to higher planets, but to infamy." You can continue, Mataji, from the next verse. Right? Now 2.2. Yes, thank you. Right. Sorry for the interruption. Right. So in the now for the first time in Bhagavad Gita, after chapter 1, the word Sri Bhagavano Vacha is taken out, right? So in the previous verse, we saw Madhusudana Krishna, right? The phrases was Madhusudana Krishna spoke the following words. Here there is no Bhagavan. Even in chapter 1, there is no Bhagavan. The word Bhagavan is not used. Now there's a huge important reason as to why here Bhagavan is used, because it starts with that phrase, right? Sri Bhagavano Vacha. Bhagavano Vacha means the Supreme God spoke. Uvacha, as I mentioned yesterday, means to speak, right? So for the first time in the Bhagavad Gita, the word Bhagavan is used for Krishna in substitution for the word Krishna, right? So why is it used here? Now it is used here to emphasize the change in the position that Lord Krishna adopts towards Arjuna, right? Now in the first chapter, if you recall, throughout the Mahabharata, Arjuna and Krishna were great friends, right? But when Arjuna tells Krishna all these problems, Krishna ceases to be just a friend, right? Now he is a guru who is to render advice about how Arjuna has to conduct himself, right? So when that change is brought about, that's when Sri Bhagavana Uvacha happens, right? So that's a very important distinction that the text makes between Sri Krishna and the previous verse where it says Madhusudana Krishna Uvacha. Here it is Sri Bhagavana Uvacha, right? So that's a very important thing. And Krishna, importantly, also starts this verse with a gentle chiding, right? Because after all, it is the last moment in the battlefield, right? He's going to go to war, right? It's like a doctor who has a patient on the operating table and then has doubts whether he has to perform the surgery or not. It's as serious as that, isn't it? So the important word here is kasmalam idam, right? So that is, it means impurities. How have these impurities come upon you? They are not befitting a man who knows the value of life. So Krishna is gently chiding Arjuna here, right? So let's see. Let's proceed further. 2.6 now. Okay. Now this is Arjuna speaking, right? Nor do we know which is better, conquering them or being conquered by them. If we kill the sons of Dhritarashtra, we should not care to live. Yet they are now standing before us on the battlefield. Now, if you recall yesterday, in yesterday's chart, this was the verse which led to indecision, the ground of indecision, right? So because it found one set, it was included in the previous chapter. But generally what happens when people think about spirituality, they think it means to give up everything. Okay, let's be very clear, that is not so actually, right? The love of Arjuna for his kith and kin makes it very clear here that it is not just attachment, it's not just giving up things, right? In spirituality, it's not like that. Now Arjuna has a decision to make, right? So should he fight or should he not fight, right? That is the decision that he has to make. Now of course we also will have life decisions to make, not to the decision of Arjuna's caliber, right? But then we also have important decisions to make, what course of study to take, what from serious decisions like what course of study to make, to take up after your primary education and your secondary education, and what whom to marry as a spouse, and to regular day-to-day decisions like what to cook, what to eat, and all that, right? So each day we are faced with this task of taking decisions, right? So how do we take these decisions in a proper manner? And Krishna in fact answers this at the end of the chapter, in the second part of the chapter, right? So how do you make decisions? That is also covered in this chapter of Bhagavad Gita, right? So generally, how do you get the correct answer, right? Your approach to decisions will largely depend upon the mode in which you are. Yesterday, when we saw Prakriti, about the element of Prakriti, we saw about what it comprises of, right? So it comprises of three things. Can anyone say what are those three things that Prakriti is comprised of? Just unmute and answer. Not really conversant yet. Okay, so Prakriti yesterday we saw comprises of three elements, which is Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, right? So these are the three modes under which a person generally acts, right? Now, a person in the mode of Tamas cannot at all decide, right? He is very indecisive. And then whereas a person in the mode of Rajas, he decides, but then he decides impulsively. He does not think. He does not care for the consequences. He does not think about the consequences. He usually acts in hate and then regrets in leisure, right? Whereas a person who is sattvic in nature, he takes a decision after much introspection. He thinks a lot. He consults people and then he asks for advice, right? And then he makes the decision that he wants to make, right? So from different angles, he considers before he comes to a decision. Now, these are all the different ways in which a decision is made, right? We'll examine all this in detail in chapter towards the end, towards I think chapter 14, where we specifically deal with the characteristics of Prakriti. Okay, so just for this purpose, for this sloka, just know that Arjuna is indecisive, as we dealt with yesterday, right? So what happens with this indecisiveness? Let's go on to the next chapter. We'll know. 2.7. Oh, this is a very important sloka. Yes,
स्वभावः पृच्छामि त्वां धर्मसम्मूढचेताः यच्छ्रेयस्यानिश्चितं ब्रूहि तन्मे शिष्यस्ते अहं शाधिमां त्वां प्रपन्नम्.
I am now confused about my duty and have lost my composure because of miserly weakness. In this condition, I am asking you to tell me clearly what is best for me. Now I am your disciple and a soul surrendered onto you. Please instruct me. Right? So this is the surrender shloka, right? This is where Arjuna actually literally surrenders to Krishna and asks for instruction, asks for advice, right? So again, as I was mentioning, till this point, Krishna does not open his mouth to answer Arjuna's questions, right? And the second life lesson is this, that unless someone asks you specifically for advice, never give your advice, right? Because your advice then is not valued, right? You listen to their problem, you listen to their problem with all the compassion that you can muster, but unless they want your advice, unless they seek your advice specifically, you should not give it, because when you give advice, it should be taken with respect, right? So unless it is asked for, you do not give the advice, right? And another aspect of this same sloka is the way in which Arjuna addresses the matter, right? Notice the prayer that Arjuna makes here. He does not ask for a wonder weapon which will end the war automatically, or he does not ask for any shortcut or to mesmerize or hypnotize the Kauravas to give Pandavas the kingdom, right? The lesson here is that you should face the situation that God has chosen to put you in, right? So your prayer should be more for the strength and the courage to face the situation in which you have been put into by the Lord, right? So your prayer should be like Arjuna's prayer here, right? He surrenders to Krishna, right? And he requests Krishna to tell him what is to be done, what is best for him, right? This is how our prayer should be, right? There's no point in asking for Krishna, give me a lot of money, Krishna, give me good health. See what happens. Sometimes we don't even know what this is good for us, right? So that is a decision that we should leave for Krishna to make, right? So all we have to say is, oh God, I surrender onto you. Please do what is best for me. That's what Arjuna is saying here, literally, right? So that will take care of all the maladies, all the hardships that we have. That will be taken care of in such a prayer. Instead of saying, Krishna, give me that, instead of saying, Krishna, give me this. This is a sort of a prayer how a devotee approaches Krishna with, right? Tesam nitya bhuktanam yogakshema mahamyaham, right? So Krishna says that he will preserve what we have and give what we do not have, right? That comes in 9th chapter, much later, right? So anyway, apart from all these things that I've just mentioned, we should also see this scene from Arjuna's perspective, right? Now, when Arjuna sees the army in front of him, full of his relatives, he is confused, right? He is a Kshatriya, right? Now, as a Kshatriya, you cannot admit of your weakness to anyone, right? Now, it is because Krishna is his trusted friend that Arjuna reposes trust in him and expresses his problems to Krishna. So it is also important to whom you should disclose your mind. So you can't go to any Tom, Dick, and Harry and tell your problems, right? You have to have a certain element of trust in that person to disclose your troubles, right? So that is another important aspect from this verse, right? And another important thing, this verse is so pregnant of meaning, right? So another important aspect, another way of looking at this sloka is that it takes more bravery to surrender and to seek help than just to put your head down and push forth, right? So sometimes, as I was just mentioning, you have to take a break and apply your wisdom, not just your intelligence, your wisdom, to consider how a situation is developing, right? And then there will come a point where you will have to make a decision as to whether you have to go forth with this or you will have to take a step back, right? Now here Arjuna applies his wisdom. He seeks help. He doesn't know what to do, right? So he asks for help from Krishna. Now, as a Kshatriya, for him, it's a very difficult thing to do. And imagine the kind of person that Arjuna is, right? He's not an ordinary person that like you and I, right? He has fought with Shiva for the Pasupatashtram, right? So he has fought with Shiva and he has pleased Shiva with his valor. The Mahabharata is replete with instances in which Arjuna has displayed his courage, has displayed his humility, and his humbleness, of course, is another aspect that is reflected in this verse, right? So all these aspects is what emerges from 2.7. This one verse brings out all these several aspects, life lessons that we learn from this one sloka, very important sloka, right? So just to recap what we just saw from this sloka, we saw three things. One, we should acknowledge weakness and seek guidance, right? Second, we should seek guidance only from the correct person and not from anyone, right? And three, we should consider failure as a stepping stone only when you're humble, right? And four, fundamental step is to accept a genuine guru, right? So here Arjuna takes Krishna as his genuine guru, right? And therefore it is that he surrenders to him. So all these aspects arise from this one sloka. That's why this surrender sloka is a very important sloka in the Bhagavad Gita, 2.7. Please keep it in mind. Okay, so let's proceed further. Yes, this is okay. So now Krishna is going to start answering the questions. And as I mentioned yesterday, Krishna Krishna starts giving out the answers only after Arjuna has surrendered to him, right? So this is 2.13. He takes up the first question, the first ground of compassion, right? Let's see. What is 2.13? Hare Krishna Mataji.
देहिनोऽस्मिन् यथा देहे कौमारं यौवनं जरा तथा देहान्तरप्राप्तिः धीरस्तत्र न मोह्यति.
As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. The self-realized soul is not bewildered by such a change, right? So this is the first instruction that Krishna gives us in the Bhagavad Gita, right? First advice. And see where it starts from. It starts directly from expiry of a person, from death, right? So this is perhaps one of the very few spiritual texts which starts with death in the very opening of it, right? So the first instruction, remember, of the Bhagavad Gita is that we are the soul, not the body, right? So that is the reason that that Krishna gives for compassion, right? Now Krishna explains the aging of the body here, right? And he links it with inevitable expiry, right? Till here we know that a person is born, he becomes he grows as an infant, he has boyhood, adolescence, adult, old age, and then eventually he expires, right? Now what happens after expiry, that is what is meant is explained in this sloka, right? The most important part is the revelation of what happens thereafter, right? After one expires. Krishna says that the soul passes into another body at death, right? And Krishna urges Arjuna not to be confused by this change, and that a self-realized person who will not be bewildered, will not be confused by such a change. So therefore, Krishna answers Arjuna's question on compassion, saying that your compassion is entirely misplaced, because you are not, you are only going to vanquish someone's body. You're not going to touch the soul, right? Because the soul, I mean, the next verse will make it clear. Because Krishna says that the soul is eternal, it is forever, right? So when you are only going to deal with the body, Arjuna, your compassion is misplaced, right? Now this is 2.20. This is the characteristics of the soul, right? 2.20.